Something just shifted. And I don't mean that loosely. I don't mean it the way people say it when they're trying to encourage someone who has been waiting too long. I mean it in the way that has actual weight behind it, the kind of weight that only comes after something has been building, compressing, accumulating for a very long time. You did something recently. You made a move. You took a step. Maybe it was quiet, something only you know about, something you carried to the moment entirely alone. Maybe you walked away from something that had been holding you in place for years longer than it should have. Maybe you said yes to something that genuinely terrified you. Maybe you finally sent the message, made the call, signed the paper, closed the door. Maybe you let something go that you had been holding on to past its season, and the letting go felt like both a relief and a freefall at the exact same time. You know what you did. And here is what I need you to understand about it. That step, that decision, that move, you almost talked yourself out of it, just activated something. Something that has been held in preparation for you for 10 years. Not 9, not approximately a decade. 10 years of accumulation, of building, of loading, and the step you just took was the final combination that opened it. I know that's a significant statement. I know part of you might be sitting with doubt right now, reviewing the step, questioning whether it was wisdom or impulse, wondering if the ground on the other side is as solid as the moment made it feel. You've believed before. You've positioned yourself for something and watched it not come through. You've done everything that was supposed to work and still ended up in silence. So I understand the caution. I understand why part of you is listening with one arm still a little crossed, just in case. But I need you to stay through this entire message, because by the time it closes, you are going to know with a specificity that will feel personal in a way that's hard to dismiss exactly what has been opened for you and exactly what you are supposed to do with it now. This is not an accident that you're here. This message was made for the specific version of you who just took a step and doesn't yet fully know what it activated. Let me tell you what the last 10 years actually looked like. Not the curated version. Not the version you give to someone at a dinner table who asks how you're doing, and you say, good, staying busy. The real version, the one that lives in your chest, in the quiet moments when you let yourself be honest about it. You showed up, you kept going, you did the kind of work that doesn't get talked about, because there was nothing visible to show for it yet. You exercised faithfulness in spaces where faithfulness had no immediate audience. You prayed into silence and got up and kept going. You believed in something, in a calling, in a purpose, in a sense of what you were made for, and you refused to let it go, even when the evidence around you kept suggesting that letting it go was the mature and rational thing to do. And the silence was the hardest part. Not a dramatic, cinematic kind of suffering. Not a story with a clear antagonist you could name. Just the steady, grinding, relentless weight of showing up year after year and watching the return not come. Watching other people step into rooms you had been preparing for longer than they'd been paying attention. Watching recognition and opportunity land somewhere else on someone less ready. Someone who hadn't put in what you put in. Someone who had a conversation at the right moment or was standing in the right place and got handed something that you had been working toward for years. And the worst part, the part that quietly wore you down in ways you didn't always let yourself fully acknowledge, was that you couldn't find the logical explanation for it. You searched yourself honestly. You asked the hard questions. You were willing to course correct and examine and admit where you fell short. And still the silence answered. Not a silence with a message, just silence. That is the decade I'm speaking about. The one where you stayed faithful when leaving was completely understandable. The one where you held your integrity in situations that didn't reward you for it. The one where the gap between what you knew you were built for and what you were actually experiencing became something you had to carry in your body every single day, without a visible resolution, without a clear timeline, without anyone who could tell you with certainty when it would change. I need you to hear what that decade actually was. Because you've been reading it wrong, and the misreading has been costing you something, a quiet background self-blame, a weight that sits underneath the faith, an unspoken question about whether the silence was a verdict on you. It was not a verdict. And before I tell you what it actually was, I need to make sure this message is landing where it's supposed to. Let me get specific. You felt it in the social dimension, the way certain connections went quiet, right at the moments when you were finally starting to feel some internal momentum. Not with a conflict, not with an argument you could point to. Just a slow, unexplained withdrawal of energy from people you had genuinely invested in, people you thought would be there for the duration. And you couldn't make sense of the timing. Why now, when things were finally starting to move on the inside? There was nothing concrete to address, so you watched the distance grow and let it without fully understanding it. There's a particular loneliness in that kind of disconnect. It's not the clean grief of a clear ending. It's the drawn-out, low-grade ache of a relationship slowly becoming less than it used to be, without a conversation about it, without a resolution, without the closure that would let you put it down cleanly. And underneath the loneliness was often a question you didn't want to ask out loud. Is this my fault? Did I do something that made people pull back? Is there something about me in this season that is difficult to be close to? I want to answer that question right now. It wasn't you. The withdrawal was not a verdict on your worth or your character. It was a repositioning people whose assignment in your life had a scope that was ending, moving out of proximity before you understood why. And the question isn't whether it hurt. It absolutely did. The question is whether you let it mean something about you that it was never meant to mean. If you did, this is the moment to release that interpretation. You felt it in your professional or vocational spaces, the rooms where you were, by any honest assessment, the most prepared person in them, and somehow still the least visible. Still the one who got passed over when recognition was being distributed. You watched someone else get the seat, the ask, the opportunity that had your name written all over it, if preparation meant anything at all. And you kept showing up anyway with your full investment, with your full presence, because you understood the season required faithfulness, even when the results weren't cooperating. But it stayed with you, that specific sting of being ready and being overlooked anyway. You felt it in the practical reality of your everyday life, the version of your circumstances that you are still in or were in until recently, that you absolutely should have moved past by now. Not because you lacked vision, not because you weren't working, but because the forward movement that should have been the natural consequence of everything you were putting in, it just didn't come. And at some point, you stopped explaining it to people because the explanations were getting harder, and even your most supportive relationships had a limit on how long they could hold not yet with you. If any of that just landed, if you recognized your actual decade in those words, hit the like button right now, because this message was specifically built for where you are, and the fact that it found you today is not coincidence. But those were only the external signs. There's an entirely different dimension of this that happened inside you. And these are harder to describe because they didn't have a clean, nameable shape. The 3 o'clock wake-ups, not rooted in anxiety. Not the kind of waking where your mind immediately floods with worst-case scenarios and your heart rate climbs. Just awake. Specifically, unusually awake. Alert in a way that felt different from insomnia. Like something was asking for your attention without being willing to fully identify itself. You'd lie there in the quiet and feel the weight of something significant that was still approaching. Not dread, not fear, just a weight and an unusual quality of presence. The recurring word or phrase, a scripture, a concept, an idea that kept finding you from different directions without you going looking for it. You'd hear it in a conversation you weren't expecting it in. You'd open something and find it there. It would surface in the middle of a completely ordinary day, while driving, while doing something routine, while in the middle of a moment that had nothing to do with it. You didn't manufacture it, you just kept noticing it. And mostly you registered it and kept going because you didn't know what else to do with the noticing. And then the moment, right before the step, that shift from patient and waiting to simply clear. Something in you that had been steady and measured for years became suddenly, specifically direct, not reckless, not impulsive. This was the opposite of impulse. A clarity that didn't need external permission, that didn't wait for perfect conditions because it had finally understood that the perfect conditions were not coming. And it said, now, this Move. And you did. Even though the doubt came almost immediately, even though you second-guessed it within hours, even though part of you is still sitting with the question right now, was that faith or was that foolishness? Here's what I need you to sit with. Those weren't random experiences. The 3 a.m. alertness, the recurring word, the sudden clarity, those were not your nervous system misfiring. That was something much larger than you coordinating a moment, aligning internal conditions for a specific action at a specific time. And the decade that produced all of those experiences, it was not a waiting room. It had an architecture you haven't fully seen yet. Let me show you what that architecture was, because you've been reading the decade as waiting, as stagnation, as a prolonged holding pattern with no clear reason or visible end point. But here is what was actually happening underneath that surface. There is a kind of preparation that cannot be rushed. There is a specific quality of capacity, a depth of character, a resilience that doesn't require external validation to sustain itself, a groundedness that holds when the circumstances stop cooperating, that can only be built through sustained faithfulness in obscurity. You cannot build it in a sprint. You cannot download it or fast-track it or manufacture it through the right circumstances or the right relationships. It requires the very specific formation that only comes from keeping your integrity when there is no immediate reward for it, from staying when leaving was justified, from holding on to purpose when the evidence was consistently not cooperating with the belief. Picture a vault, a real vault, the kind designed to hold something of serious, significant value, the kind where every combination digit matters, where the security around the contents is proportional to the weight of what's inside. For 10 years, that vault was being loaded. Every year you showed up without external acknowledgement that added. Every month you held your integrity in a situation that didn't reward you for it that added. Every single time you chose not to quit when the rational, completely justified option was to walk away that went in. The vault was loading with something proportional to what it cost you to fill it. Let me be specific about what was actually accumulating. The years you showed up and did the work without recognition, those built a quality of groundedness that does not depend on external validation to sustain itself. That quality is rare. Most people who receive significant blessing before they've been deeply formed by sustained obscurity struggle to hold it well. They either lose it because they weren't rooted enough to steward it, or they're changed by it in ways they didn't anticipate. You were being given the foundation first, before the building went up. So the building, when it goes up, will stand. The clarity of your calling, the thing you kept believing in through the silence, that also sharpened during the decade. It went from something you felt vaguely to something you knew specifically, from a direction to a destination, from a sense of purpose to an understanding of what you were actually built for. The silence didn't take that from you, it refined it, burned off the parts that were ambition rather than assignment, expectation rather than calling, and the character, the specific quality of person who comes through sustained faithfulness without becoming bitter or grasping or resentful. That is what the decade built in you, and it is one of the rarest things the next season requires. And the step you just took was the final combination digit. Not the only act of faith in 10 years, not the only moment you got something right, but the specific one that completed the sequence, the one that said to whatever governs this person is ready. This person has been built. Open it. And what came out? It is not a narrow, single-dimension return. It is multi-layered. It is proportional. It is going to show up in your life in ways that will take time to fully name. And it is already in motion. Now, the people who left during that decade. I need to address this directly because I know some of you have been carrying a quiet grief about it that doesn't have a clean resolution yet. Someone walked away. A friendship that dissolved. A relationship that didn't survive the pressure of what you were going through. Maybe someone who said they would be there and then, slowly, wasn't. And in your honest moments, you've wondered whether their leaving was a verdict on you, whether it confirmed something unflattering about your worth or your readiness. It was not a verdict. Some people are only designed to accompany you through one specific phase of a journey, not because they failed you, not because you failed them, but because their relational assignment in your life had a scope, and that scope was the preparation phase. What is opening now is different in weight, different in dimension, and it requires a different kind of presence around it than the preparation season did. And something else that matters, the blessing that just activated needs ground that isn't already shaped by the agreements and identity patterns of the previous season. Some of the people who left their departure was not a theft, it was a clearing, a preparation of the space. Clean ground, unencumbered ground, ground that isn't already defined by who you were 5 years into the preparation. Their leaving was clearance, not abandonment. If you have been sitting with unexplained grief about someone who exited during your decade, let this be the beginning of peace about it. The space their departure created is the exact space that what's coming needs to enter. You are allowed to release the grief of that cost. If this is landing in a specific place for you, stay with me, because the next part is where the real confirmation begins. Before we get there, I have to tell you something I would be doing you a disservice to skip. Right before a season of this magnitude opens, there is almost always a surge of resistance. Not a sign that you've misread the moment, not evidence that the blessing is at risk. A pattern. Opposition always peaks right before assignment opens. This is observable. Look back at every significant transition in the lives of people who were being prepared for something of real weight. There is almost always a period of intensified friction right before the door opens. Think about the period immediately before the step you just took. Was there an unusual weight that arrived in the weeks before you moved? Not the steady weight of the decade, something more concentrated, more acute. Did the self-doubt that had been manageable for years suddenly get louder, more specific, more persistent? Did people around you behave in ways that were subtly different from their usual patterns, not dramatically, not in a way you could cleanly address, just slightly off? Did small, practical things begin stacking up with a timing that felt almost designed to slow you down? That was not coincidence. When something of real value is about to be released, the resistance that shows up is proportional to the size of what's opening. The intensity of what you experienced in the season right before your step was not a warning that you were about to make a mistake. It was a confirmation that you were standing at the entrance to something significant. The larger the resistance, the larger the door behind it. And here is what you need to carry. You walked through it anyway. The resistance peaked and you moved, which means the resistance already lost. You do not need to keep relitigating something that has already been answered by your faithfulness. The step was the answer. You gave it. That chapter is closed. Stay in this space. Subscribe here if you haven't already, because what's building in the second half of this message is where the deeper confirmation lands. Now, there may still be some residual noise around you. Voices suggesting you reverse course. People who have reappeared recently not to celebrate you, but carrying just enough uncertainty to make you question what you know. An internal second-guessing that doesn't have a rational foundation but keeps resurfacing anyway, keeps reopening a case you thought was closed. I want you to understand something about all of that. The step is already recorded. What was activated when you moved cannot be undone by doubt. It cannot be reached by the skepticism of people who were not part of the decade that built you. Residual resistance has one power, and one power only. It can ask for your attention, and you do not have to give it that. You don't need to argue with the doubt. You don't need to defend the decision to the internal voice that keeps requesting another hearing. You simply need to hold what you know quietly, firmly, without announcement. The kind of authority that comes from a decade of faithful preparation does not require volume. It only requires presence. Now let me show you the confirmation that this step was always the plan. Something has shifted in the actual architecture of your life. The vault that was loading for a decade is open, and what came out of it is not a single thing you can point to on a list. It's operating in multiple dimensions of your life simultaneously, whether or not all of it is visible to you yet. I want to slow down here for a moment, because I think people often receive this kind of message and let it pass through them. Like a wave, they feel it, They believe it for the length of the video, and then ordinary life reasserts itself, and the feeling fades. And then they're back in the same doubt they started with. I don't want that to happen with this. So I'm going to ask you to do something specific right now, before I continue. I want you to think about the last time you did something faithful that had no audience. The last time you stayed when you could have left. The last time you chose to believe in something that wasn't yet producing evidence. Locate that moment. Hold it for a second. That moment went into the vault. That is not a metaphor. That is not a motivational statement designed to make you feel better about a season that cost you something real. That moment, and every moment like it in 10 years, accumulated. And the thing that's been released since you took your step is connected to every single one of those moments. The return is proportional to the investment, and the investment was deep. Clarity, the sustained fog over your sense of direction, the weight of not knowing which path to walk, the exhaustion of too many open questions and too few clear answers that is lifting. You are entering a season where the knowing comes with more ease. Not perfect certainty, not an absence of uncertainty, but the specific absence of paralysis that has been your default for years. The direction is going to become clearer than it has been in a long time. Alignment. The right people are beginning to move toward your life, not the people who were assigned to your preparation. The people who are assigned to your assignment. There is a meaningful difference between those two groups, and you will feel it when the second group begins to arrive. Something in you will recognize them before your mind has finished processing why. A quiet settling, a sense of rightness that doesn't need to explain itself. Provision, the practical dimension, the financial, vocational, material dimension of what a new season actually looks like is already in motion, not because you performed your way into it, because a decade of faithfulness positioned you for it. The provision that's coming is not something you re-earn, it's something you receive. Stay positioned, keep your hands open, and recognition. After a decade of doing work in rooms that gave the credit somewhere else, of being qualified and overlooked, of being prepared for opportunities that went to someone else, the recognition that is now moving toward you is specific. It is calibrated to what you were actually built for, not a generic version of your potential, the version of you that the decade created. Some of you have already started to see the first edges of this. A door that appeared from a direction you weren't tracking, an opportunity that came through an unexpected channel, a small loosening around something that had been stuck, something you almost dismissed as too minor to count, too early to be the real thing. Don't dismiss it. The early returns are not the full return, but they are real returns. They are the first confirmations of the vault opening. The first evidence that the decade is not ending in continued silence, it is ending in release. If you felt the recognition of that just now, type 777 inches, the comments. Let this community witness where you are. You don't need to explain it, just 777. There's a deeper layer of confirmation, and it's internal. And I want to prepare you for it, because this layer can feel quieter than the external signs, and because it's quieter, it's easier to dismiss. We tend to trust the things we can see and touch and point to. We tend to be skeptical of the inner landscape, especially when we've been in a season of silence that made us question whether our inner sense of things was reliable at all. But here is what I know. The decade built discernment in you that went deeper than what you could see on the surface. The formation happened on the inside before it's going to show on the outside, which means the internal signs are not less reliable than the external ones. In many ways, they're more reliable. They're registering the shift before the circumstances have fully caught up to what's already changed. So don't dismiss the internal evidence. Don't file it under wishful thinking or confirmation bias. What you're feeling underneath the surface right now, take it seriously. It is speaking accurately about your current position. Think about the period since the step, the last few weeks, maybe just the last few days. Is there a lightness somewhere underneath everything? Not an absence of challenge. The challenges haven't disappeared, and I'm not suggesting they have. But underneath the challenges, something is different from before. A baseline weight that you had been carrying for so long it stopped registering as unusual, it just felt like you're normal. And now that it's no longer there, the absence is more noticeable than the presence ever was. Like you've been wearing something heavy for so long, you forgot it wasn't part of your body. And now that it's off, you can feel the difference between what you were carrying and what you actually weigh. Have your dreams shifted? Not asking you to read them as specific prophecies, just noticing. Are they different in quality? Are they arriving somewhere rather than replaying something? Is there a different texture to where your mind goes in the hours you're not directing it? And this, the quietest, and in many ways the most significant indicator, has the second guessing slowed, not stopped, not gone silent, but slowed. The internal voice that was always building a fresh case against your readiness, always finding a new angle to challenge your legitimacy for the first time in a long time, it seems to have run short on new material. And in that uncharacteristic quiet, there is something underneath it that is harder to name. A settled quality, a sense of being in position, not at the destination, not with every answer, but in place. In the season that 10 years were pointing toward. That is not your imagination. That is your inner architecture, responding to the fact that the vault is open. Your spirit registers the shift before your circumstances fully reflect it. What you're feeling in that quiet, settled place, that is the earliest and most reliable confirmation that what just changed is real. Receive it right now. Say it in your heart, or say it out loud. I receive this, because what just landed in this moment deserves a yes from you. Type 999 inches. The comments if you feel it. Say it where you are. I receive this. It's yours. Now I need to give you specific instruction for this season, because understanding what has been activated is only part of what this message is for. The other part is knowing how to carry what just opened. The first instruction is going to go against your instinct. Stay quiet about this for a season, not forever, not in shame, not in secrecy. But understand that what has just been activated is still in its earliest formation, still establishing itself, still taking its first shape in the real world. And in that earliest window, certain kinds of premature announcement can invite premature resistance. When you declare a door before it has fully opened, someone in your environment can close it with their honest doubt before you've had the chance to walk through it. Not because they're against you, not because they wish you harm, simply because they are not built to carry the weight of your new season, and their honest skepticism, offered in a moment before the confirmation is visible, can create friction you don't need right now. Who do you tell in this early season? The people who have already proven, across the actual years of your preparation, that they can hold what you're called to. Not everyone who loves you, not everyone who means well. The ones whose belief in you had a real cost, who were still present in year 7 and year 9 when moving on, would have been the rational choice. The ones who saw what you were capable of when you couldn't see it yourself. Those people get to know early. They get to be in the room. Everyone else gets to see the fruit when it's ripe. They don't need access to the root while it's still going down. And protecting the early formation of what just opened is one of the most faithful things you can do with it. Second instruction, and it requires a maturity the decade specifically built in you. New discernment about who shows up around the opening. Because when something shifts in your life the way it has just shifted for you, not everyone who arrives in the wake of that shift is assigned to where it's going. Some people are drawn to the energy of an opening, to the atmosphere of something significant moving without being aligned to what's actually behind the door. Here's how to distinguish. Aligned connections in a new season have a specific quality. They don't arrive with urgency. They don't require you to move quickly into closeness before the relationship has earned that depth. Something in you settles around them, the same discernment that recognized when to take the step, recognizes when a person belongs in the chapter you're entering. It's quiet. It doesn't need to justify itself. People drawn to the opening, but not to you, feel different. A pace that's faster than trust has been established. An interest in what's happening for you that outpaces the interest in who you actually are. A subtle focus on the door that's opening rather than on the person standing in front of it. You will feel the difference. Trust that. The discernment that told you when to move it was built precisely for this kind of work. And using it in this season is not closing yourself off. It is stewarding what 10 years of formation built in you. Say amen if you receive that. This is not paranoia. This is one of the specific gifts the decade created in you. And now the permission I have been waiting to give you until this moment. The permission you have been waiting for the longest. You can rest, not in the sense of stopping, not in the sense of disengaging from your life, but in the very specific and very important sense of no longer needing to strive to earn what has already been activated. The proving is done. 10 years of faithfulness was the work. The step was the completion of the work. What has been released as a result is not something you now have to re-earn by immediately performing at a higher level. It is not something that gets revoked if you don't sprint hard enough in the first few weeks of the new season. You enter this season in a posture of receiving, hands open rather than fists clenched, present and expectant rather than anxious and pushing. The door is open. Your assignment now is to walk through it with the confidence of someone who knows what it cost them to get here and who trusts what was built in them during the decade that brought them to this door. There is a practical reality to the rest I'm describing. The decade of sustained load of holding faith and purpose under pressure with no visible return, that kind of season, has a cost to the body, to the nervous system, to the part of you that holds the daily weight of choosing to believe in something that isn't yet paying out. And the transition out of that season is not always immediate or automatic. The circumstances may begin to shift before the body has registered that the season has changed. You may need to actively give yourself permission to stop striving, to stop checking to see if you're doing enough, to stop running the calculation of whether you deserve what's opening, to sit even for a few minutes at a time in the quiet certainty that it is already done, already set in motion, already activated. Let the decade go from your body as much as from your mind. For those of you who are in the very earliest days of this transition and can feel the recalibration happening in your body and your spirit, I've created something for this specific moment, not as a commercial offer, as a provision, an audio experience built for this season, for the settling, for the receiving, for the quiet reorientation of a person who has been under sustained formation and is now stepping into the open field of what was prepared for them. It's $39, and it's in the description. It's there for you if it's yours. This is not a sales moment, it is a provision moment. Everything I've just given you prepares you for what's opening, and the first thing that opens is closer than the calendar would suggest. Let me tell you what's already in motion. There is a vocational or financial door that has been closed to you, not because you weren't qualified, not because you weren't ready, but because the sequence of events that had to precede its opening hadn't concluded yet. That sequence is now complete. That door is moving. Not because you applied one more time or pushed in a new direction, because the combination completed and what was locked is now unlocking. There is a relational alignment coming that is specific to the version of you the decade created. Someone is moving toward your life, or is already in your orbit, in a way you haven't fully registered yet, who is suited to who you are now. Not the version of you from year one of the preparation. The version of you who just took the step. Pay attention to who shows up in the next season with an unusual quality of recognition. They may see something in you that most of your current environment has consistently missed, and that recognition will feel different from what you're used to. There is an energetic shift accompanying this transition. The specific heaviness that was your normal, that lived in your body, in your breathing, in the weight you carried from one day to the next, is lifting. Not because your circumstances become easy overnight, but because the foundational burden of being in the wrong season is being removed. You were built for this, and your body is beginning to register that truth in ways you'll be able to feel before you can fully articulate them. And there is one shift I want to name by itself, because it may be the one you've prayed for the longest, the one you asked for in your most private moments, and then quietly talked yourself out of expecting because the decade made it feel like too much to hope for. The shift of recognition, of being seen. Not by the people who overlooked you for 10 years, not by the rooms that gave the seat to someone else. By the right eyes, in the right room, at the right moment. The recognition that says, this is the person, this is exactly who was needed here. The placement that your preparation was building toward, where your readiness and the right opportunity occupy the same space at the same time. That is part of what was activated. The trophy in this title is not decoration. It is not hype. It is a picture of proper placement, of arriving in the exact position that the decade of preparation was pointing toward, and it is already in motion. You've prayed for it in language, you've kept private. You've imagined the moment, then told yourself to stop imagining it because the decade made hoping for it feel too costly. The moment where someone who matters, who has authority, who has placement ability, who has the kind of credibility in a room that opens doors, looks at you and says, "Where have you been? We needed exactly this. You're exactly what was missing." That moment is not a fantasy you need to let go of. It is part of the blueprint of what was just activated, and it's moving. If you know someone who recently took a step of faith, who is standing in the earliest days of something new and doesn't yet know what they've activated, send this to them right now. They need it. And if you felt the shift in this message in your body, in your chest, in the quiet place, underneath all the noise, type 999 inches the comments, or type "I am ready," because you are. You have been for a long time. Before this closes, there is one more thing I need to speak over you. This is the part that matters most. Stay. Chosen one. I'm not using that as a general address. I'm not saying it to make you feel temporarily significant in a way that won't outlast this video. I'm saying it because it is accurate. You were selected not because your performance finally reached a qualifying threshold, not because you accumulated enough spiritual merit, not because you outlasted everyone else who was in the running. You were selected before the decade started. You were known before the preparation began. And the decade itself was the evidence of the selection, not the application for it. What you stepped into when you took that step, it has been prepared for you with specific intention, not assembled in a hurry, not improvised because you finally moved. Built. Designed to the dimensions of who you actually are, your actual capacity, your actual calling, the story that the decade wrote in you that could not have been written any other way. There is no generic version of what's opening for you. It was constructed for the version of you that the silence created. I want to release you from some things now. You no longer need to carry the proving. 10 years of showing up without acknowledgement. You do not owe anyone more demonstrations of your readiness. You have proven it in full. What is owed to you now is not more evidence. It is the receiving of what the evidence has been building toward. You no longer need to carry the wondering, the quiet background question that has been running for years. Did I get this right? Am I reading this accurately? Is this real, or is this a story I've been telling myself? You can set that question down. The step answered it. The vault opening answered it. The quiet signs you've been feeling in the days since you moved have been answering it, one confirmation at a time. You were not wrong. You did not misread this. And you no longer need to carry what the decade cost you. The things you didn't get to have during the formation season. The ease you watched other people move in. The opportunities that went to someone else. The time. The relationships, the preparation cost you. The private, specific grief of a decade that was beautiful in its faithfulness and painful in its silence. Let the cost go. What it cost was the price of the vault's value, and the vault was worth every year of it. Not because suffering is inherently good, but because what the decade built in you is exactly what the season you're entering requires. The formation was not a detour. It was the direct route. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not the person who almost made it. You are the person arriving exactly on time at the door that was built for the specific version of you that this decade created. There is no other person who can walk through this particular door. It was made for the combination of who you are and what you've been through. The step you took was the key. The door is open. Walk through it. Type "I receive" in the comments, or type 111. Because this community, the people watching this in the same season, who took their own step and are learning what it activated, this is the space where your new season deserves to be witnessed and marked. You are not walking through this door alone. Walk through it. This is your season.